Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington on day 2 of President Trump's Mideast trip as he looks to deepen and in some cases renew relationships in the region in ways that could also enrich his sprawling personal business interests. The president arrived in Qatar today where he was greeted by the emir. The visit comes amid intensifying concerns from security experts and ethics watchdogs about the president's plan to accept a $400 million luxury Qatari jet to be used as Air Force One. The president has brushed aside any and all concerns, and he told Fox News while on board Air Force One he feels his presidential plane is inferior. Look.
When you land and you see Saudi Arabia and you see UAE and you see Qatar and you see all this, and they have these brand new Boeing 747s mostly, and you see ours next to it, this is like a totally different plane. It's much smaller, it's much less impressive, as impressive as it is. And, you know, we're the United States of America. I believe that we should have the most impressive plane.
The subject of airplanes was also top of mind at today's meetings as the president and the Qatari emir took part in a signing ceremony, which included a joint declaration of cooperation as well as an agreement for Qatar to buy 160 jets from Boeing. The president's push to tighten ties with Qatar comes as the Trump Organization is building a golf club in Doha, and it's a notable shift from his past criticisms of the country. Here's what President Trump said about Qatar during his first term.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level.
The president struck a significantly different tone today, instead touting his close personal relationship with the emir.
We've been friends for a long time, and this is an outstanding man. He's a great man, and we're going to help each other. I just want to thank you for the friendship, for the long-time friendship. And again, long before any of this stuff, we just liked each other. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But we always had a very special relationship.
But it's not just in Qatar where the president is forging ahead with new relationships with leaders and countries the U.S. once distanced itself from. A day after announcing the U.S. will be lifting sanctions on Syria, Mr. Trump met with Syria's new president, who is the former leader of a group the U.S. has called a terrorist organization. It's the first time in decades the leaders of the U.S. and Syria have met, marking a dramatic diplomatic shift. As President Trump looks to normalize ties not only between the U.S. and Syria, but also potentially between Syria and Israel. Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, who is in Doha traveling with the president. Garrett, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Talk to me about the key takeaways from day 2 of this trip.
Well, look, Kristen, the White House said at the outset that this would be a trip focused more on deal-making than on diplomacy. That has largely been the case so far. The president landing here in Doha today, going immediately to meet with the emir and signing off on a bunch of economic agreements that the White House says will add up to about $1.2 trillion. Now, they don't provide the details to make that math work, but on some of the deals that we can kind of look under the hood at, there is this $96 billion deal for Boeing jets purchased by Qatari Airways that Boeing says would be the largest ever purchase of their wide-body aircraft. It's the kind of thing we've seen this president tout at the White House. Now he's able to do it in these palaces in the Middle East, striking economic agreements in many cases with the business leaders in tow, as was the case today with the CEO of Boeing at his side during that announcement.
Garrett, to what extent is the trip being overshadowed by the ethical questions surrounding this gift? We just heard the president talking about it, that the Qataris are saying they want to give to the United States this new plane.
Yeah, look, it's certainly a huge part of it. I mean, for example, today, you really can't talk about Boeing and the purchase that they're making of these, the sale that they're making of these airplanes to Qatar without talking about the other big Boeing headline, which is this jet potentially being handed over by the Qataris to the United States. The president didn't take questions really in any format yesterday in Saudi Arabia, but did today. And he faced some questions about this, including last night in the clip you just played from Sean Hannity. So he's having to fend some of this off. But I will say this is one of, I think, the key differences between the first term and the second is that this president is very dug in, saying essentially, look, I'm doing this stuff out in the open, and if you've got a problem with it, that's your problem. The White House does not appear to be backing down at all from their plan to accept this gift on behalf behalf of the Defense Department. What happens next and whether this plane is ever put into service as Air Force One, sort of a wholly separate question. But the White House is not kind of intimidated, I think, by the coverage this time around, and perhaps the way they might have been 4 years ago.
And Garrett, as you've been talking, we are looking at live pictures of President Trump there with Qatari officials. Garrett, before I let you go, talk to me about this extraordinary meeting between President Trump and the new president of Syria. This is a huge diplomatic shift, Garrett.
Yeah, Kristen, the idea here that the U.S. would drop sanctions on Syria, which in some form or fashion have existed for decades, is front page news across the region. It is certainly the biggest headline here along the Gulf. You've got a new government in Syria, and we know that the president was pressured or spoken to, at least, let's say, by the Saudi Crown Prince and by the president of Turkey to make this move and essentially give this new government in Syria a chance to start fresh. The president came out of a meeting which no U.S. reporters were allowed with the president of Syria this morning and told reporters on Air Force One that he was sort of enamored with this new president. He talked about him in the language we're used to hearing from Trump, about being a tough guy, a brave guy, a fighter who had been a jihadist with a $10 million bounty on his head until a few months ago. But I think this shows part of the shift we're seeing, which has been a subplot of this whole trip, by the president who's much more willing to listen to some of these Arab leaders than he might have been willing to listen to more traditional allies like Israel, who's viewed this new government in Syria with a lot more skepticism. The president willing to go along with giving this new government a chance and being roundly praised for it here in the Middle East. Kristen?
All right, Garrett Haake, really incredible reporting. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know those are long hours. Hang in there. Thank you. And while President Trump continues his Middle East visit, his agenda is running into some potential sticking points in Congress as his so-called big, beautiful bill is advancing through committee on party line votes, but is encountering some opposition from Republicans of all stripes. Some hardliners want more cuts to spending, and some moderates want a higher cap on state and local tax deductions, with several saying they would be a no on the bill as it is. While Speaker Johnson says those discussions may take a few days, he remains confident consensus can be reached in his conference.
We're working around the clock to build that consensus to get the 218 votes and deliver on President Trump's America First agenda so the American people can really begin to feel relief.
Joining me now is South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson. He is a member of the House Agriculture Committee and chair of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
We are, of course, going to get to all of the legislative disagreements and debates going on in your party in just a few minutes. But first, I do want to ask you about some comments. You were asked yesterday about President Trump accepting that Qatari luxury jet. You repeatedly said, quote, "I don't like it." Explain why not.
The president is right. The current Air Force One is not sufficient for the needs of the job. So we have a problem we have to fix, but we should not fix the problem with the Qatari aircraft. I think there are national security concerns. I think there are financial concerns about breaking this thing down to the studs and building it back up. And then it's not hard to imagine why some people have some ethical concerns as well. Let's solve the problem. I think we can find a better way.
Well, you actually lead me to my next question, because you're right. In order to actually make this Air Force One ready, it could take 2 years. It could cost more than $1 billion. Would you try to block any funds from being appropriated for that use?
Oh, you got to pick. I mean, there are a lot of food fights in Washington, D.C. every day. I try to be smart and strategic about what are the right fights to fix today to move America forward. I think there are going to be a lot of questions about the finances of this. It would be a little hard for me to imagine that that would be the fight that I would go pitch a big fit on.
All right. Well, let's turn to the major tax and spending package. I know you all have been working really hard on it, and there have been some debates and disputes about what next steps should look like. Do you think the package right now, as it stands, has the votes to pass?
I do. I know it doesn't look like that. And there will be some tweaks on the margins. but we have seen this movie time and time again. There are a lot of holdouts for Speaker Johnson, so people tell us we can't get him elected. There are a lot of holdouts on the Republican House rules package, so people say we can't get that passed. We can't get the Trump spending package done. The reality is we got all of those things done. We got the budget resolution for reconciliation done when people said we couldn't do it. We're going to get this done, too. Now, we should cut more. I would not put myself in the happy camp about how this package has come together, but nobody is going to get everything they want. I actually think we're really well positioned to stick the landing next week, though.
So you're not in the happy camp, Congressman, but as of right now, would you vote yes?
Oh, I would vote yes. I am going to. I mean, I don't play hard to get. I know if I was going to be a great negotiator, I would say hell no, and I would have red lines every single week around here like a lot of my colleagues do. I want to push to make this bill more conservative and more fiscally responsible than it is today. I do not think it does enough deficit reduction. I am working to move it in the right direction. But as it's constructed right now, this is a good product, not great. I want to make it great.
And as you say, I mean, look, some of the disputes are over deficit reduction. The big dispute going on right now, and Speaker Johnson talked about this, is over, of course, those local tax deductions. He's saying that could actually last through the weekend. Some of your colleagues, just so our viewers know what we're talking about, from the New York area, New Jersey area, are digging in. How do you see this impasse getting fixed, Congressman Johnson?
I don't like SALT, the state and local tax issue. I don't think we should subsidize high tax states. I would move the number below a $10,000 deduction if it was up to me. But politics is the art of the possible. Dusty Johnson doesn't get everything he wants. I know that number is going to go up. And although I know this looks like the single greatest point of conflict right now, it's a relatively easy one in the final analysis to get to because it's just numbers. You just turn that dial. When does it expire? How big does it have to be? This is going to be a relatively standard negotiation that I think is going to get resolved toward the end of the weekend.
Well, and there are other lawmakers, of course, who actually share your concerns about deficit reduction. Paul Gosar is one of them. He says, as it currently stands, I'm afraid that not nearly enough is being done to garner the support to pass the big, beautiful bill. Needed reforms fall short. Meager spending cuts in waste. Long way to go. You are striking a note of confidence that ultimately everyone's going to get on board, or at least there will be enough votes. But when you hear those types of comments, long way to go, do you think this can get done by Memorial Day?
It can get done, at least out of the House by Memorial Day.
Yes.
And here's what happens. Here's why we win so much more often than the press has a tendency to predict we will win. At this stage in the process, people compare the product. Members compare the product to perfect, and they find it wanting. As we get closer and closer to the deadline, people begin to compare the product to the next alternative, which is failure, and they begin to understand the really good things in the product. So, for instance, there is much-needed welfare reform in this package. For instance, there are much-needed reforms to how we go about having some of these agencies actually go take care of their business and get things done. And I think people are not going to want to give up on those big successes.
Well, as you know, Democrats are really pouncing on the Medicaid piece of this. I want to play you what President Trump told me earlier this month. Take a look.
Yeah.
What happens if it comes to your desk, has the tax cuts, but also cuts to Medicaid? Would you veto that?
Well, we're not doing that.
Would you veto that?
I would if they were cutting it, but they're not cutting it. They're looking at fraud, waste, and abuse, and nobody minds that. If illegal immigrants are in the mix, if people that aren't supposed to be there, people that are non-citizens are in the mix, nobody minds that. Waste, fraud, and abuse. But we're not cutting Medicaid, we're not cutting Medicare, and we're not cutting Social Security.
The president was pretty clear there, but the CBO says more than 10 million people would lose their coverage with this package. Congressman, are you failing to live up to President Trump's own standard with this bill?
No. First off, we do have to correct the record. CBO was asked about a plan that would include not at all extending the premium tax credits on the ACA exchange. And so, yeah, I get it. When the Democrats ask the CBO a loaded question, we shouldn't be surprised when we get a loaded answer back. But listen, I understand CBO at some point, when they reconfigure their math to make it more accurate, is going to show that there will be some people for whom their eligibility will be reduced. So let's be very clear about what that means. That means that there is a young, able-bodied person who is not pregnant, does not have disabilities, does not have young children at home, who could work but is choosing not to. They are choosing not to volunteer, they are choosing not to be in a training program, and they are choosing not to go to school. Those are the folks that will face these work requirements. Now, we know that work requirements in SNAP work. We know that work requirements in TANF work. This has always been a bipartisan area of agreement. 1996 welfare reform has proven to be a massive success. Apparently, political times have changed because now putting that same regime in place for Medicaid is causing my friends on the left to lose their damn minds.
Well, but as you know, the counterpoint to that is that work requirements could ultimately wind up depriving some people of coverage that they need. Of course, it is a subjective matter. What do you say to that argument that it still runs the risk, Congressman, of not getting Medicaid to all of the people who would need it?
I would say this. I grew up of modest means. And so many people I know who are out there every single day working hard, the working poor. We want to help them. If after they're working hard, they still can't make ends meet, there is absolutely a role in a rich country for us helping them to get to the next payday. But if you got a 27-year-old who can work and refuses to work, I think we need to have the same approach in Medicaid that we have in SNAP. Food is pretty important. Of course, health care is important. And for a long time on a bipartisan basis, we have looked at the literature and we have known that when you apply food stamps to people on SNAPs, over 2 years, their incomes triple. They move out of poverty. They begin to realize the American dream. This should not be about keeping people in poverty. It should be about people helping people escape poverty. We know work requirements work.
All right. Congressman Dusty Johnson, I know you have a very busy day. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.